Good day. Rubric behind the scenes of the Ukrainian authorities. Today we will talk about the situation in Bakhmut and Avdiivka, about a possible counteroffensive, a ban on commenting on the military case, a ban on the use of Leopard tanks, a lack of ammunition and mobilization. Well, now in more detail. The battle for Bakhmut is the main theme for the office of the president. The General Staff sent elite units to protect the city, which made it possible to partially stabilize the situation. Any statements and comments will be strictly filtered so as not to discredit the authorities. Zelensky's plan with flank attacks did not take into account weather conditions, which is why the reserves accumulated in Konstantinovka, Slavyansk, Seversk cannot take part in the battle for Bakhmut. Zelensky twice a day makes a report to Zelensky on the situation in Bakhmut. On Bankovaya the situation is monitored and demands to stabilize the defense of the city. PMC Wagner launched attacks on the outer and inner contours of Bakhmut, which narrows the capabilities of the Ukrainian troops. There are battles for the villages of Krasnoye and Kromovo on the outskirts of the city. The armed forces of Ukraine continue to lose 2 to 3 districts per day, which narrows the control of the Ukrainian military in Bakhmut. The dynamics are so negative that if the Wagner PMC offensive is not stopped, then we will lose the city in 2 to 3 weeks. Zelensky considers the activation of PMC Wagner in Bakhmut in the last 24 hours as a result of the refusal of the armed forces of Ukraine from the counteroffensive due to weather conditions. The commander of the ground forces believes that the Russian troops will try to use the operational pause with the worsening weather to capture Bakhmut and launch an attack on Seversk in order to neutralize the very need for a counterattack by the armed forces of Ukraine. If Bakhmut falls in 2 weeks, then there will be no point in a counterattack, and the enemy understands this well, that he has time until mid-April. On the sidelines there were rumors that commenting on the military case was forbidden, since the attack on Bakhmut might not happen and the city might fall within 2 weeks at a time when the weather would be rainy in the east. Everyone understands that the fall of Bakhmut will affect the image of the president, so that this does not happen, everyone should be banned from discussing this case. A source in the office of the president said that the West forbade the office of the president to use new supplies of equipment for the defense of Bakhmut. There are already more than 100 Leopard tanks in Ukraine, but they cannot be allowed into battle. The situation in Avdiivka. The source reports that the most experienced fighters and units were located in the Avdiivka direction. But now the situation is changing, they are shifting reserves, since the armed forces of Ukraine are suffering heavy losses there due to the fact that the Russian armed forces use planning aerial bombs on Ukrainian fortified areas, which smash all positions into the trash, and the blast wave is so strong that it is sometimes unrealistic to survive even in a good deep trench at a far distance from the epicenter of the explosion. At the last conference call at the president's office, the GOR reported that Western partners said that the Russians' goal was to encircle Avdiivka before Bakhmut. There may not be a counteroffensive of the armed forces of Ukraine. Opinion. The United States realized that for them a counteroffensive carries additional risks, regardless of its outcome. If the armed forces of Ukraine fail, then the Russian troops will go on the counterattack and, on the shoulders of the counteroffensive, will be able to capture more territory of Ukraine. In the world it will look like a defeat for the global West. If the armed forces of Ukraine manage to cut the land corridor to Crimea, then Zelensky will want even more weapons. The Democrats will have to enter the elections against the backdrop of new military spending on the Ukrainian war. And China will begin to support the Russian Federation. The fact that the defeat of the Russian Federation in the war will not suit the PRC after the visit is obvious to everyone. Thus, both outcomes of the counteroffensive promise an unacceptable escalation for the United States, which they seek to avoid. At the same time, the states can easily slow down Bankova's agility for the offensive. It is enough to reduce the amount of transmitted intelligence and artillery shells. Without them, the armed forces of Ukraine will slowly suffer defeat, increasing Zelensky's readiness to negotiate on the Sullivan formula. There was gossip that a lot of Soviet and Russian military equipment was in the possession of the former Allied countries of the USSR. For example, the office of the president bought Soviet shells from warehouses at a price more expensive than ordering NATO ammunition. The reason is that the Soviet ones could be obtained immediately, while the NATO ones had to wait until they were produced. The problem with Soviet shells. Their quality was sometimes very different from what Ukraine bought. Sometimes 30% of the purchased batch was a liquid, raw gunpowder, rusty hull, rotten tip. Since these shells were stored in poor conditions and were decommissioned long ago, they were sold to Ukraine at the price of new ones. A source in the op said that the apparent shortage of ammunition is forcing the West not only to increase their production, but also to look for alternative suppliers in developing countries and on the black market. Since last year, the office of the president has been actively using the capabilities of Ukrainian arms barons, many of whom were on sanctions lists for smuggling, and now work for the General Staff. Often you have to change Western weapons for artillery shells that Ukraine needs, since African countries take advantage of the situation and simply refuse to sell. The chairman of the Servant of the People faction said that due to the deployment of Russian nuclear weapons in Belarus, mobilization in Ukraine could be strengthened. I wonder how those mobilized from tactical nuclear weapons will help? The Ukrainian authorities use every excuse to hide the real losses and explain the incessant forced mobilization. The source said that the last wave of mobilization in Ukraine is going very hard, which is why there are constant conflicts with the military commissars. The General Staff has long demanded to strengthen this track and make it universal, so that men can be immediately sent to the TCC without unnecessary paperwork. No matter how hard the mobilization goes, it continues. Moreover, there is a geographical imbalance. The leaders in conscription to the armed forces of Ukraine are Odessa, Kharkiv, Dnipro. On this I say goodbye to you, take care of yourself, until we meet again.